Phil, this is Greg Allison with Galactic Greg. It's coming to you live on 13 September 22. My friends, we have a special guest today. A special guest is a nuclear expert. He is an ex-Navy man. He has done R&D in nuclear power since the 1980s. He was a submariner. And his doctor, Roger Blomquist. And he's going to talk to us about, he's a principal nuclear engineer. He's going to talk to us about fast neutron reactors. This is a concept that could actually give us plentiful power for a very long time because they consume the spent fuel. They're far more efficient. And if they fail safe, unlike the reactors we're dealing with today. And he's going to even talk about how with this more efficient process, the fuel will last long and how we can even get it out of the water, seawater. So my friends, I give you Dr. Blomquist.
Thank you, Greg. I'll share my screen. So I realize nobody wants to die by PowerPoint, but it's a good way to reinforce what I'm saying. So if you hate PowerPoint, apologies.
Well,
and I'd like to encourage everybody to chat questions to Greg while I'm talking. I'm happy to be interrupted if I've said something unclear. So, you know, my objective here is to explain as much as I can in a way that's useful to people. So don't pay any attention to the PhD. My real hardcore experience is in the Navy. And then after graduate school, I did a lot of work in computing methods in reactor physics. Reactor physics is the core discipline in nuclear engineering, but it's like any other kind of engineering, except it's more fun and pays better. So here's my outline, and I'm not going to go through the outline, but I want you to look at that graphic on the right there that shows a nucleus of an atom, some undefined element. And it's got the nucleus in the middle, and then the electrons zipping around in their atomic orbitals on the outside. Actually, in real life, if the electrons were that far away, then you wouldn't be able to see the nucleus. It would be so tiny. And so matter is all pretty much empty space with little bits of huge mass isolated in the middle of all these atoms. But the point in this is energy density. And when we burn something, then we're tinkering with the behavior of the electrons that are zipping around outside the nucleus. When we're using nuclear power, we're not changing that, but we're basically destroying the nucleus of the atom and releasing a huge amount of energy. How much energy is that? Well, if I fission one uranium atom, I get the same amount of energy as if I burn 7.5 million methane atoms. So that is a very large ratio, and that makes nuclear inherently environmentally benign because the amount of materials that are required are minimal. They're tiny compared to the amount of materials that are required for any less dense energy source, including fossil fuels, but especially compared to very diffuse energy like wind and solar and biomass. So this energy density means we don't emit anything from, well, the fact that it's fission means we don't emit anything from combustion because there is no combustion. Because we get a lot of bang for the buck out of every kilogram of uranium we dig out of the ground, it's a very small mining footprint. And because this is packed into a reactor, it's not spread out over the countryside, we have very small land use requirements. And one other thing I'd like to mention is fuel is energy storage. So any power system that doesn't involve a fuel does not include energy storage. That's an extra expense. And electricity is a service. It's not a commodity. You can't really store electricity in any scale It's got to be there when you throw the light switch or turn on your garbage disposal or whatever. If it's not there, you're not turning it on. We do have some energy storage that's not fuel, but it's very marginal. The other thing about nuclear is it's small fuel consumption, very small mass of fuel means we have security of supply. So it's easy to stockpile. And in fact, our current commercial reactors typically have at least a year and a half's worth of fuel sitting on site outside of the reactor, ready to go in. So they can run a long time if, for example, the oceans became not navigable. Let's just hypothesize it's a global war or something like that. But we can retain this security of supply for quite a while. It's also very reliable compared to other power sources. It doesn't depend on the weather. It doesn't depend on the spot price in the oil, coal, or gas markets. It's very safe. And if you look back over history, it's sort of a natural progression. Several hundred years ago, we used only renewables. The renewables were wind for maritime propulsion, sailing ships, and biomass. And that was human muscle or animal muscle. And that energy came from crops that were grown and fed to either the humans or the animals. And by the way, that reliance on renewables was one of the reasons that slavery was economical, because you didn't have to pay for the slavery, right? You just had to keep them fed. The other point I'd like to make is fission is a natural process. In fact, in West Africa, about 2 billion years ago, there were some natural reactors in riverbeds where uranium was deposited, and these reactors percolated along for tens of thousands of years before they exhausted the uranium. So it is not entirely a man-made technology. So I put the picture of the submarine up there because this shows how clean nuclear is. We had 105 guys on my ship. Back then it was 100. Back then it was just guys, and we were sealed up in this long steel tube with the reactor. And I got less radioactivity, less radiation dose at sea that I would have gotten being away from the ship back home in port, because we're all exposed to radiation 24/7 wherever we live. It's just a fact of life on Earth. And the energy density plays out in this graph I have of the Germany's carbon intensity. So this is how many grams of carbon dioxide released per, well, in this case, kilowatt hour of electricity produced. And these are two countries, Germany and France. France is the line at the bottom. Germany's the line at the top. And this is, I think, every day over the course of these, 5 years or so. And you can see France, which relies almost entirely on nuclear energy for its electricity, is a much lower carbon emitting electricity system than Germany's is. And this is after Germany had spent many billions of dollars installing wind turbines and solar panels. So I'm not going to talk anymore about all those other methods. We'll get right into the nuclear here. And again, I want to encourage you to ask questions as we go. So why fast spectrum reactor? So what's a fast spectrum reactor? Well, first, when a neutron comes out of fission, which is part of the chain reaction, those neutrons ultimately go on to cause other fissions. That's why it's a chain reaction. The reaction kind of goes in a circle. In a similar way to, let's say, the economy. The economy is a chain reaction, and what takes the place of the neutrons is money. So I buy something from you, and you take the money and you spend it on something, and the money kind of goes in a circle. Somebody pays me because I've got a job. That's a chain reaction. Well, that's exactly how a nuclear reactor works. It's the neutrons that come out of fission that cause fission in other uranium atoms. In today's current commercial reactors, we slow those neutrons down. And we do that because it means we don't need to enrich the uranium as much. So I won't go into detail on that. It can be fairly highly technical, but the probability that a slow neutron will cause fission in uranium is way higher than the probability a neutron will cause fission at a high energy. So that's what a fast spectrum reactor is. It's a reactor in which we do not slow down the neutrons. So I show you here a light water reactor on the left. It's a pressurized water reactor, which is one of the two main variants of light water reactors.
Yeah,
we have these now. We've got 90 some of them operating in the United States. There are probably 300 of them operating around the world. They're reliable, they're safe, they're effective. They only use 1% of the energy in the uranium we dig out of the ground. But since there's so much energy, the energy density is so high, it sort of doesn't matter. The other thing about it is the spent nuclear fuel contains long-lived radioactive actinides. The actinides are the elements, including uranium, and further to the right, if you remember your periodic table from chemistry. So these are the heavier elements. So that term will bubble up a couple more times. But you can see how this commercial reactor works on the left. It's got the control rod. Let's see, can you see my cursor here? Good. So here are the fuel rods they're mixed in with the control rods kind of. There's a pump that pumps water in here. It gets heated up, goes around this loop to the steam generator, and the heat's transferred into the steam generator, and that water in the steam generator, the blue water here, it boils and ends up driving the steam turbine. The water in this loop, there we go. The water that's in this loop here is radioactive, but it decays away very quickly. It's not really a threat to anybody or anything, including the operators. The steam in the steam system is not radioactive, and it spins a turbine, which turns a generator, which produces electricity, just like any other conventional power system. And then we recycle that water as well. So it's two closed loops. And then the last loop on the right, which shows next to the condenser, that goes to a river, a lake, or the ocean, or some other way of rejecting the extra heat that we don't use. And there's no way to make that much more efficient, by the way. Fast reactors, they're passively safe. The light water reactors have emergency safety systems that have to work. So they have to be specially designed, specially manufactured, tested frequently, and so forth. We can design fast reactors to be passively safe. They don't need any of these safety systems because they sort of inherently control their own power levels and cooling. With some recycling, we can increase the uranium utilization from only 1% to over 99%. So think about your Honda CR-V, you're getting 30 miles per gallon. Just imagine what it would be like to get 3,000 miles per gallon. You sort of wouldn't care much how much gasoline costs because you'd only be going maybe 4 times a year to the gas station. Well, the supply of uranium isn't really a big problem these days, and that's one reason we haven't built these reactors. But the other thing about these reactors, and I'll go into a bit of detail on this, is they can consume the long-lived actinides by destroying them with fission. And those long-lived actinides are the materials in the used nuclear fuel that make us have to design a spent fuel repository that lasts hundreds of thousands of years.
See, that's what I like about this concept, Roger, because I'm really concerned about grid down situations. The power grid fails, and we got all these spent fuel rod pools, especially before they put it in the cask, the solid cask, where they have to cool it with the water. Once that water evaporates off, the cladding on them will burn on contact with air, the zircaloy cladding.
Yeah.
And that's a big risk, a big hazard that we have. They're not in the containment building. If people look at the picture on the left, you see this big line around his reactor there. That's the concrete containment building to contain what's in the reactor. But the spent fuel rods are not in there. They're just have a sheet metal roof over them typically. And so that's a huge risk in a grid down situation. But when you're consuming this stuff, you don't have that scale of a problem. Furthermore, even though we're supposed to have had facilities to put this stuff in, we just don't have that. We built one in Yucca Mountain, and Utah was very happy for us to totally build that thing out and furnish it with the very last paper clip before we moved anything in. They go, no, you can't do that. So they were happy for spending all kind of money building it, but they wouldn't let us use it once we got it built. So that was a tragedy for safety of the world, in my humble opinion. Even in Utah, they may think they're safer, but they're really not, because as long as this stuff's all in the atmosphere. So I've got a lot of issue with that. But the best thing we could have is some way to get rid of that stuff, to burn it up. And that's what I like about this concept. And I also like your passive safety feature. So if you'd go on a little bit about that, I'd appreciate that, how this thing doesn't require all the safing systems that a regular plant requires.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'd like to circle back to the spent fuel for just a hot minute here.
Absolutely.
It's never hurt anybody, and that's because it's sealed in welded shut metal tubes. So those are the same tubes that goes into the reactor, and that's what comes out. So it's never emitted, and it takes, after about 5 years, it's cool. It doesn't produce very much heat, and so it's adequately cooled just by air. Well, so it's only the fuel that is just come out of the reactor that needs active cooling. And after a few days, it still needs some cooling, but the amount it needs drops off pretty rapidly over time. So anyway, so let's move on here. So what is uranium? So on this pie chart on the right, this is natural uranium. This is stuff we dig out of the ground. It's only 0.7% uranium-235, and that's the only uranium isotope, natural uranium isotope, that fissions. Uranium-238 fissions only a little bit in a regular reactor, so it doesn't provide much of the energy. So we typically enrich this to about just under 5% before we stick it in a reactor. And then we use up about 80% of that uranium-235. So when we're done, it's got about 1% uranium-235 in it. It's got another 1% plutonium that gets built up, which I'll describe in just a second here. So U-235 fissions at any neutron speed. U-238 fissions sometimes, more often, at fast neutron speeds. But the idea of a fast spectrum reactor, a breeder reactor, is to harness the energy in the U-238 by converting it to plutonium-239. This happens by neutron capture. And if you look at this cartoon I made down here in the bottom, a neutron is absorbed in a uranium atom. If this were uranium-235, it would break into 2 big chunks and 3 neutrons would come out to carry on the chain reaction. But then in this case, since it's absorbed in uranium-238, and remember, most of the uranium in the reactor is 238, it becomes uranium-239 because it just added a neutron, and that's unstable, and it radioactive decays to neptunium-239, and that radioactive decays to plutonium-239, and plutonium-239 fissions just like uranium-235. So it's a good reactor fuel. In a water-cooled reactor, in a thermal spectrum reactor, that is, when 239 absorbs a neutron, a fair fraction of the time it becomes plutonium-240, and then this chain continues to the higher elements and heavier elements. And those are the things that are challenging for repository designers because they have long half-lives. If we recycle used fuel in fast neutron reactors, we get so much energy out of each kilogram of uranium that we can afford to extract it from seawater. And there's 1 million times more uranium suspended in the ocean that we could access than there is economically recoverable from the Earth's crust.
Well,
So,
hey, Roger, I'd like to make a point on that. We might could kill 2 or 3 stones with one bird in doing so, because you got a lot of the country that's in dire need of water. And they, for some reason, don't seem to be too keen on the idea of taking seawater and desalinating it. But it turns out that not only can you get uranium out of the seawater, but you can also get lithium out of the seawater to build the batteries that you're going to be powering with your reactor. And when you get the lithium out, you've actually almost desalinated the water already. So I think, and the lithium on its own, I don't know, probably the uranium too, the lithium would more than pay for the process of desalination of the water. So it makes sense. And I did a video about a year ago, I think on my Green Grace channel, calling and saying, well, hey, we need an Apollo project in this country for water desalination. And I think we still need to do something, because there's no reason, and all the suffering they have in the West for lack of water, when they could be doing something like this. I mean, it's kind of like the suffering they've got from lack of energy, because they want to go with solar and wind and they can't meet their energy needs. And so they tell everybody they got to have green cars by 2035. And the next day they turn around and tell people they can't charge them. What do you think? So I'm a big fan of the water approach to the extraction of minerals, uranium, lithium, whatever.
so there is all kinds of stuff in seawater, that's for sure. So here we're still on why fast spectrum reactors. Okay, they produce marginally more neutrons per fission. So in a water-cooled reactor, the average is 2.43 neutrons per fission, and we lose 1.43 of those, and the other one goes on to carry on the chain reaction typically. But we get more neutrons per fission when they are caused by fast neutrons. And so we can do things with those extra neutrons, like, as I showed you in the previous slide, get them absorbed in uranium-238, extra uranium-238, to make plutonium-239 for the same reactor or for other reactors. And this is a way to completely stop uranium mining, ultimately. And the other thing we can do is we can destroy the minor actinides, which are the ones that are a problem in the geologic repository. We convert those to electricity, and I'll show you a bit on that in a few minutes.
Yeah, they used to call this a breeder reactor back in the 70s.
So you can make it as a breeder or a burner. It can either produce or consume materials, and it depends on how you configure it. But with a fast reactor, you have that choice. So to summarize, why have a integral fast reactor, which is a fast reactor that has its own recycling system? You get 100 times the resource utilization. You reduce the radiotoxicity period of the used fuel by a factor of 1,000, which is a pretty big number in engineering. And there's about 100 times lower chance of core damage or radiation release. And I want to emphasize here, we don't have a problem with the radiation releases from our current reactors. They're plenty safe. It's just easier to make one of these reactors safe, easier, and in the end, we hope, cheaper to do that. So I'm going to get nerdy here with this chart, and I pasted the chain I showed you at the bottom of reactions with neutrons and uranium-238. And so you could look at these bar charts as the probability that each of these steps would happen. And there are 2 sets of bars here. The red ones are pressurized water reactors, which are current commercial reactors, which are thermal reactors. And then the blue ones is sodium cooled fast reactor, which is the kind of reactor that I'll be talking about during most of this time here. And you see we're looking mostly at uranium-238. So you can see sodium cooled fast reactor fissions. This is the probability of fission if that nucleus absorbs a neutron. So we produce a bit more plutonium-239 in a fast reactor, but then we don't fission any of the Neptunium-237 in a water-cooled reactor and almost none of the plutonium-238. And if you look at the plutonium-239 column here, you can see that a fast spectrum reactor fissions much higher percentage of the plutonium-239 than a water-cooled reactor does. And that produces plutonium-240, which is the beginning of this chain that goes up to the higher, heavier elements. What's most spectacular is you look at 240, plutonium-240, where the sodium-cooled fast reactor fissions most of it, and a water-cooled reactor fissions none of it. So this is why the amount of waste coming out of just even a once-through system, which is where you don't recycle, in a fast neutron reactor, we can get about 1/7 the waste out of a fast reactor than a commercial water-cooled reactor. And so forth and so on off to the right with americium and curium and so forth. So these fast neutron reactors are really good at destroying this heavy stuff and converting it to electricity. So here's, I again copied this reaction chain up in the upper right-hand corner. Now I'm going to get real nerdy here for a minute. I'll try to return to Earth before long. But this is a log-log plot. So along the bottom, on the lower right here, that's the number of years after the fuel has been taken out of a commercial nuclear, to one of today's commercial nuclear power plants. So on the left, it's 10 years. At the far right hand, it's 1,000,000 years. And every unit is a factor of 10. The vertical axis is also log-log, or it's also a log axis. And what's plotted there, what the variable is there is how hazardous is the material compared to the uranium we dug out of the ground in the first place. And we have no program. Natural uranium is mildly radioactive. We do not have a national program to dig it all up and put it in cans so that we're protected from it. And the reason is we don't view it as being a hazard. So I would argue as an engineer that I've met my obligation to society and future generations if I can change my used reactor fuel to a form that is less radioactive than the uranium we dug out of the ground in the first place. And that's what this plot shows. So there are two kinds of atoms that come out of a chain reaction. One are the transuranics, and that's the cartoon I show you at the upper right there. And the other are the fission products. Those are the chunks that uranium splits into when it fissions. And what a fast neutron reactor with recycling can do is take the materials in that upper curve, put them back in the reactor in a fast neutron reactor, and destroy them by fission, producing electricity. And you still get the fission products, but they're gone. Whoops, I'm sorry. They're gone in about 300 years. They're basically below uranium ore. The current waste we have takes about 300,000 years to drop below the natural uranium ore toxicity. So this is the summary of fast neutron reactors as nuclear garbage disposals. We take the garbage, turn it into electricity, and much shorter half-life stuff. Excuse me. So what does a sodium-cooled fast reactor look like? I had a picture on the earlier slide. This one is blown up a bit more. So one great thing about liquid metals and molten salts is when you heat them up to very high temperatures that you have in a reactor, they don't increase in pressure. Anybody who's got a pressure cooker knows when you put your pressure cooker on the stove, it's sort of a heavy aluminum pot, and it's heavy and thick because when you heat up the water above the boiling temperature in the pressure cooker, you're not letting the steam out. And so the pressure builds up. Well, when you do this in a water-cooled reactor, a pressurized water reactor, they run at 2,200 pounds per square inch. That's 150 atmospheres. So that is very high pressure. So if you have a leak, there's a huge pressure pushing it out. Your typical garden hose might have a few pounds of pressure coming out, and maybe a little bit more if you put the nozzle on it at the end. So you can imagine what that does to the leak rate. And so we have to have a very large steel, robust steel system, a big vessel that contains all this stuff in a water-cooled reactor. We don't need that. We don't need 8 or 9 or 10-inch thick steel vessels for a sodium-cooled reactor because it's atmospheric pressure. So we can get by with something on the order of an inch, which is a lot cheaper. That means we can make it really big and we can immerse the entire reactor and its cooling system in this vessel that doesn't have any penetrations in it for cooling loops and all that other stuff. So there's no leakage path out of it.
But now also, conversely, that would mean you can make it really small if you wanted, right?
Yeah, you could, but you'd give up this advantage. So let me tell you why this advantage, that's a good point. Let me tell you why this advantage is useful. At Fukushima, they had water-cooled reactors, which means they have to have fairly small vessels. They're still enormous to look at, but very thick vessels that are sort of shrink wrapped around the reactor core. You can see in this diagram, the reactor core is a tiny share of the volume in this vessel. It's a much bigger share in a commercial water-cooled reactor. And after the tsunami wiped out their emergency diesel generator, they had 45 minutes to get water in to increase the cooling of the reactor to prevent the fuel from being damaged and melting. And that takes energy because they're pushing against pressure. And the energy was electricity that was provided by the diesel generator. And the diesel generators were wiped out by the tsunami. And the electricity grid was already down due to the earthquake. So they had nothing. They had 45 minutes. This vessel is so big compared to the core, it's got all that extra sodium in there. It's got a huge inertial mass of sodium that heats up very, very slowly. It's kind of like the difference between your cast iron skillet and aluminum foil. You know, you can heat up your aluminum foil way faster because it's so thin. Well, this is a massive amount of sodium. And we did, some of my colleagues did a calculation on this. If this reactor had been at Fukushima, they would have had not 45 minutes, but 2 weeks to restore some cooling to it. And these can be designed with natural circulation, air cooling, just like your chimney uses, so that you would never, ever need to do anything active to get cooling. And we call that walkaway safe or inherent safe and so forth. But here we have, it looks similar to the pressurized water reactor. It's got this intermediate cooling loop, which is non-radioactive sodium in this case, that goes into the steam generator and produces steam. And the rest of it looks a lot like the water-cooled reactor. Some of the other concepts that are of interest are lead coolant instead of sodium. That has the Soviet Navy used some lead-cooled reactors in their submarines. They had problems with lead freezing at fairly high temperatures, and there are corrosion issues with lead and so forth. It's got its merits, and it's not being abandoned, but it's not the main thrust of the advanced reactor design. Also, fast reactors can be made cooled with helium or molten salts. So not just sodium cooled reactors. Any questions on this?
Guys in the chat room, we've got only 19 in the chat room right now. If you got questions, feel free to ask, and I will take them to the speaker here.
Yeah, you just interrupt when they come up.
Yeah, I'm running the chat room side. They're just chatting with each other right now, making comments for the most part. So now I see this thing in a gravity gradient. You show the sodium pool, the hot sodium, in one pool, and you got another pool that it's got the cooler sodium in it. And what if you had if you were in space, could you design a space version of this and still maintain the system if you were in zero gravity or conversely, very low gravity? I'd assume this would work even on the moon with 1/6 gravity. What about zero gravity?
Well, the lower the amount, the lower the intensity of gravity, the bigger the separation you need. So actually, this diagram is a little bit misleading, Greg, because you always have the heat sink up high and the heat producer down low to get natural circulation. Think of your chimney, the fire's at the bottom of the chimney.
Yeah, and that's your gravity gradient gives you that.
So exactly. So this picture should actually show this, whoops, sorry. I've got a very sensitive trackpad on this new laptop. So normally the coils in this heat exchanger on the right there would be inside the vessel would be much higher. And that's where you get the natural circulation. So I don't really see this working particularly well in fact, I don't see it working in a zero gravity system. I think you need some sort of a pump, but I am not a space reactor guy. So you're kind of dragging me out of my lane here, Greg.
Well, I tend to be a space guy. This is a space channel, but this would probably work on the moon, even with 1/6 gravity. You still have a gravity gradient.
Yeah, if there's any gravity, you can have natural circulation. So
right. You still have a gravity gradient. Not as powerful, but it's still there.
So why sodium? It's just a terrific coolant. It sucks heat out of fuel rods 95 times better than water does. 95 times better. That's 2 orders of magnitude, which means you need a lot less of it, which is handy because it slows down many fewer neutrons. And we've demonstrated, the industry has demonstrated passive safety performance in tests. So that's well known to work. And sodium's compatible with other materials. Water is corrosive and sodium is not, as long as you keep the oxygen out of it, which isn't very hard. And there are other industries that use liquid metal sodium. So there's a pretty major industrial experience base for the use of sodium. It also doesn't absorb many neutrons. So it has a whole bunch of good properties. The one drawback is it oxidizes with air and water. It oxidizes very vigorously in water. In air, it sort of hisses and puffs, and it doesn't burn as well as wood does, for example, in air. But we need to keep it away from air and water. And that's just a matter of engineering the system properly. It's been done many times. There have been about 20 of these sodium-cooled reactors, test versions and experimental versions built around the world. And I think the mistakes that are going to be made have largely been made. So that's true for any developing technologies. You start out and you make some mistakes and you realize, oh, I should have designed it this way. Well, we're pretty far along on that path with sodium.
What was the Canadian CANDU reactor?
The CANDU reactor is a heavy water reactor. It's a thermal neutron spectrum reactor. Heavy water is water where instead of the hydrogen, you have a heavy isotope of hydrogen called deuterium. It's just got, instead of a proton, which is regular hydrogen, it's a deuteron, which is a proton plus a neutron. And the Canadians developed that because they didn't want to have a uranium enrichment industry, and they have a lot of natural uranium. And so that's the route they went. So how is the safety demonstrated? Well, at Argonne West in Idaho, they did a couple of shutdown heat removal tests. These were essentially accidents that were inflicted on the reactor by the operators. Obviously, they knew what they were doing. It's not like they were trying to sabotage, but it would be sort of equivalent to what an operator would do if he wanted to sabotage a reactor. And so we use a phrase unprotected here. Unprotected means the control rods don't work. They're stuck or something. They don't go in to choke off the chain reaction. In this case, that was because the safety system was turned off. So this reactor was taken to 100% power, and then the power was shut off to the reactor cooling pumps. This is known as a loss of flow accident. It's a very serious accident in a water-cooled reactor. In this case, the coolant flow is driven also by natural circulation. So the flow, although it dropped a lot, it still continued at a low level, and it was enough. And anybody who gets really excited about this and wants to learn more about it, there's this wonderful book by Till and Chang that's available free PDF, or you can buy it on Amazon if you prefer hard copy, Plentiful Energy. And it goes over these tests and a lot of the other things I'm discussing today. So here's what the test results look like. So I'm going to show you 4 plots of the same test. This is the one where the pumps are turned off. And on the left-hand plot here, that's the pump speed. And on the right is the flow rate of the coolant into the reactor core. So you can see it drops up radically. The pump speed goes to 0, but the coolant flow does not go to 0, and that's because of the natural circulation. So there's still a little bit of a flow, and at the beginning it's not enough. And that's shown here on this left-hand plot. So this is over time in seconds. This is the temperature of it's the outlet. The blue line is the outlet above the core. That's the sodium that's coming out of the core. And because the sodium slowed down, it spends more time touching the fuel rods. So it has more time to suck heat out. So the sodium temperature goes up, and actually the fuel temperature goes up too. And so that you see that temperature go up. Now, it doesn't matter if it goes up until it gets to, let's see, in degrees centigrade, probably 900 degrees centigrade. You don't want to be around there, but this is very far from that. It's not even close. And then you see that curve turns over and starts coming down. And that's because the chain reaction is shutting itself down because more neutrons are able to leak out of the core because the core is made of metal. So is the coolant. And when a metal expands, as everyone knows, and when metal gets heated, it expands. And that makes it easier for the neutrons to leak out. And that basically starves the chain reaction. So the right-hand plot here, this is the exact same transient, and that's the power level. So you can see right away the power level starts dropping off very rapidly and settles out at a very low level. It's not 0 because there is still the decay heat from the fission products, but way less, like a few percent. So that's what we call inherent safety. And if you tried to break it, you can't. That's sort of the gold standard. And if you think about it from a licensing point of view, if I work for Westinghouse and I want to license a new reactor design, I do a bunch of computer simulations and I write a bunch of reports that fill up a 12-foot long bookshelf, and I take them to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and I say, okay, I analyze all the possible problems we could have using my computer codes, which of course have no bugs in them. And my input decks, they're all perfect. I haven't made any mistakes there, and the data is all right. Or in this case, you could actually conduct the accident on the reactor. So that would be kind of a revolutionary approach to licensing. I don't know that anyone's proposed that, but I'm proposing it. So you could build one of these out in the middle of nowhere and have the accidents on it, and then you're done because they don't damage anything. So I've listed a bunch of information sources here, and these are all reliable. There's a lot of unreliable information about nuclear energy. There are a lot of people out there grinding axes, and I understand that it's difficult to tell who the real experts are. That's a challenge that everyone in society faces on a whole bunch of issues. Medical area is another one. But you need to be careful about who you listen to and go to multiple sources and see what their credentials are. Are they respected by their peers, so forth and so on. These these sources here are all pretty well curated and authoritative and kept up to date.
So let me ask you a question. With a conventional power plant, you got to get all the pumps running before you can really start it up. So you got to have the grid just to get it started to make it operate. These are not so reliant on pumps. Do you need to have much power to get this thing up and running to start with? Could you use a small generator, or you need a power grid to feed it just to get it started? It seems to me that this would be easier to start up.
I think you need the grid to get it started, and that's okay because you don't want to run them unless you're going to put electricity on the grid anyway.
Well, that's
so
true.
I actually don't know whether they could be started up using power from the emergency diesel generators. On my ship, we could do that. That was the diesel generator on our ship was sized so that we could start it up. But that's a somewhat different beast from a commercial nuclear power plant. But what you're describing is a black start
Yes.
problem. And actually, that's an issue for the entire electricity grid as well. If the entire electricity grid goes down, something's got to start up somewhere.
Yeah, the easier ones to start, of course, are the hydro dams and the coal plants, but we're getting rid of the coal plants. There's not a whole lot of hydropower, as an overall percentage. I guess solar gives you a little power if the sun's shining, or wind if the wind's blowing, but reliability just isn't there, and there's not that much power coming out of them.
Yeah.
So that's why there's been a lot of attention paid into the grid community on black start of nuclear power plants. And like my friend General Krosnick always says, it takes a coal-fired plant to start a nuke plant, pretty much. So, and even the gas plants, because of all the valves and controls them, they require a lot of power to run them. So that's why he was favoring the coal-fired plants. But TVA had a bunch of coal-fired plants, and they shut them all down under the administration before last. And as part of the green initiative, but that might not have served us as well as some things. So
yeah,
I'm hoping that we could find that this would be passively safe and easier to start, because somebody in here to ask about, was it EMP proof? And EMP wouldn't directly harm a plant like this, and it would naturally safe itself, and you're not going to have the problems with as much spent fuel out there in cooling pools of the reactor like this. Nowhere near. What would you say the percentage of spent? What would you say the percentage of waste fuel coming out of one of these plants would be compared to a regular nuclear power plant?
So of course it depends on if you're recycling. So with a regular commercial power plant, you can only recycle once economically. Then it gets to be difficult and expensive. With fast neutron reactors, you can keep putting it back in, taking it out, reprocessing it, shoving it back in. You can keep recycling as many times as you want. In fact, you should do that to do exactly what I mentioned before, namely to reduce the radiotoxicity period of the final products to a few hundred years. And I like the few hundred years figure because any good structural engineer can design me a facility that would last a few hundred years.
Right. So there
after all, we have 1,000-year-old cathedrals in Europe, right? And they were done without stainless steel, pre-stressed concrete, and advanced engineering techniques.
Right. So the guys were good with geometry, at least.
Yeah. Well, they did trial and error, and they had a bunch of errors too.
Right. Well, that's the way it is with everything, trial and error, and that's all our new technologies. Even this rocket we're trying to launch. Yeah. It's always trial and error and getting something going.
So one thing I'd like to point out while we're on trial and error is that nuclear power and mass commercial airline travel were commercialized over about the same decades. And during that period, there's been, in the US, there have been exactly 0 fatalities from nuclear energy. And there were over 2,700 fatalities in US commercial airline disasters. So it's a good idea when people talk about risks to always ask the question, compared to what?
Yeah. Well, people also look at different scenarios. What happens if the grid goes down? That worries a lot of us. Now, here's what I like about this is that this is a concept because it's so much more efficient with the fuel, because, and also the whole idea of taking fuel out of the seawater. We can have all the energy we ever want. We don't need even fusion. We don't need anything else. This could power all of our energy needs for the world, entire world, for the foreseeable future. We'd probably never need anything else for thousands and thousands of years before we could get the seawater down low enough in uranium for you to have to worry about it. That's just hard for me to fathom in my mind. It would process enough seawater to get it to the point, or enough uranium from other sources. You got another problem. By then, our technology ought to be so advanced, it would be funny. We should have fusion, thousands of years down the road from here, and maybe we'll have it in a couple of years. But this is something that solves problems today. It solves problems of grid security. It solves problems of having power. It solves problems of safety. It solves so many problems that I think we need to put a lot of attention on this, because we're chasing a lot of, we're basically, like in the old days when I grew up, people would go coon hunting. Well, sometimes that coon might tree something, or a coon dog might tree something, but ain't nothing up that tree. That's kind of how I feel our energy policy is these days. We're chasing a lot of dead ends.
So somebody just said in the battles, in the war between platitudes and physics is undefeated.
But boy, people put out the platitudes, don't they?
So if we have time, I'd like to say just a few seconds on fusion. So I think we should pursue fusion. I think it's a great idea, but fusion and fission are different in one very important way from an engineering standpoint. In fission, a fission reactor is a pile of hot rocks that just sits there with no moving parts inside the core, and the neutrons they're the only thing moving around. They're keeping the rocks hot through the chain reaction. In fission, you don't have to do anything. You just start it and it runs. Fusion, you have to keep the plasma squeezed to conditions that are like on the interior of the sun. And that's hard. I mean, we've been working on it for many decades. And even if we find a way to do it, when you build something, it's going to be unreliable.
There you go. This is reliable, it's safe, sustainable, will provide all the energy we need for the foreseeable future. I mean, we could really run the planet on this, and yet we've been ignoring it. So I think we need to put attention on this. I think we need a lot of attention put on this. That's why I wanted to go public with it and get this out here. Is we got all these people says, oh, we can't have energy. Oh, we're going to be this, we're going to be that, or we can't have water. Well, shoot, you can use the energy from this to help you desalinate the water. And then you can use that desalinated water to get you some uranium and lithium out of it. I see, I'm an engineer. I like to look for engineering solutions to all these things everybody's crying about all the time. And I think there are engineering solutions just about everything. I keep finding all kind of ideas and solutions, things like how to stop the so-called unstoppable Surmount-2 missiles or hypersonics. I come up with ideas to deal with problems. I come up with ideas to deal with problems for food shortages and many other things. I got quite a few ideas I've come up with. And it's all a matter of engineering. And this is an engineering system that will give us the energy. And that's why I wanted to bring you on here. I wanted to get this out and let people see it, because there's no excuse for all this crying and belly aching that we don't have this and we don't have that. There's plentiful energy and plentiful materials that we've got. That we are nowhere near any place. Malthusian topics are just a way to try to control people, and they're really useless. Malthus told us we were going to starve to death in the 1700s, and what he forgot was he was counting people as mouths, and he forgot people had hands, feet, and a brain between their ears. And so we've always been able to figure out a way to get out of his concepts, but yet the world leaders today seem to be locked into Malthusian thinking that we can't do anything, we're going to run out of everything, and everything is hopeless. And
so I think this highlights one of our failings as engineers is we can solve problems with physical methods, but we haven't figured out how to solve the problems of human nature.
Well, there's the whole notion of promoting it. The whole thing of getting out there, and so that's, and typically in our engineering community, we're nerds. We like to look at the technical side of how to do things, and we abhor any other discussions, especially in the political world. I've been in both universes, so I've come to understand that I can make a lot of hay because we don't promote our stuff as good as our adversaries. They're really good at promoting the woe and doom and gloom.
Our mothers told us not to brag about ourselves. At least mine did.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, that's why I got involved in things like National Space Society and writing articles and running policy committees, and you know, I just come up with ideas for how to make things happen and how to. But sometimes we got to get the word out there. We got to get the idea. You can't expect something to happen if people don't know about it. And I don't know. I think there's more money in shortages. There's more money in crying about we don't have this, that, and the other, and it's nonsense. We can do it, but we got to make it aware, and we got to get people interested in it. We got to promote this. So I ask people to share this video, promote it widely, because this whole nonsense that we're in such a pickle in this regard is not the case. Now, there are other pickles, but most of these pickles we're in because of our short-sightedness as a people. It's because we've let these woe is us people sell us on an energy grid that's not secure. We've let them spend more money fighting hardening the grid than it would have cost to harden it in the first place. Just knucklehead stuff like that. It needs to come to an end, and we need to get things fixed and get our society running. There's no reason it can't run. You know.
Well, fortunately, recent events provide some good information for our lion eyes, right? So there's the Great Texas Blackout of 2021.
Right.
There's what's currently happening in Europe and especially Germany. And there's what's going on in California. And actually many other parts of the United States are on the same path. We're just not further along. But we can hope that people will pay attention to those cases and think about how they came to those conditions that are going to be utterly miserable and harmful, and avoid repeating the mistakes of those places.
And we should have organizations like EFRI who were telling us that, oh, everything's fine. Don't worry your pretty little heads. We got it all taken care of. It's all fine, people. And they got their lawyers and they run up and down, you know, probably quite a few offices on K Street in Washington, D.C., and they run up down halls of Congress and to all the agencies and tell everybody up there everything's fine. And us working stiffs, the engineers are saying, no, it's not. It's not fine at all, but we can be made fine. All you got to do is quit paying them lawyers and just go out and fix the stuff. Well, the money you're paying them lawyers to tell you it's okay, you can actually make it okay. So that's the bottom line. We can fix this stuff. We just need to get the word out there and tell people to get it done. So anyway, any final thoughts on that, Roger?
No, I just want to get the word out. I want to get the truth out because there's way too much misinformation or disinformation.
Bingo.
And so I like to remind everybody, pay attention to who you're listening to and ask, you know, who are they? Are they real experts? There's a fine book on this called The Death of Expertise that provides some guidance on how to tell who is an actual expert, because on TV and on the internet, anybody can be an expert. And on TV news, they bring in non-experts pretending to be experts just so they'll have an argument.
Oh yeah, now we see that in the people that oppose our power grid hardening stuff. They hire people that are business majors and they're talking like they're engineers and just all kind of nonsense like that. So we know what this looks like. You know, one thing that gets me is there's other YouTube channels where people will go out there and make statements like, if you're on the night side of the earth, don't worry about a CME, it won't bother you. And it's like, really? Will get 10, maybe 100 times more views than I will get when I got Dr. Peter Vincent Fry and real solid experts on telling people what it really was. And I'm myself an electrical engineer, and I've worked system safety on avionics, space launch system. I know a thing or two about safety and avionics and about power grid and electrical systems. So, but you know, you have somebody don't know anything about it, they will get tons more views because I don't know what it is about people. They seem to gravitate toward that kind of stuff. So we got to figure that out. It's an odd psychological impediment we have in our society. And even when these people are proven wrong, they keep going back to those people over and over and over again. Like people that say, oh yeah, there's going to be asteroids hitting us like 2 or 3 years ago. And yeah, there's no way anybody will be able to deny it, you know, and of course they're not coming like they're saying. And, you know, but people still go back to them. They keep going back to that stuff. They keep drinking that well. So we got, I guess it's just a psychological problem. I'm not a psychologist by any by any stretch of the imagination. I'm glad I'm not. I probably would go crazy. I think the funny thing about it, the biggest customers to psychiatrists is other psychiatrists and psychologists from what I hear. So in any event, well, this is what we need to do, folks. Share this video, share it wide, share it all over your social media, talk about it. Let's get the word out. There are solutions, and this is a great solution to a safer, plentiful power to keep our society running. We don't have to run out of power. That's a myth. So let's get it out there and let's break that myth. And every time some knucklehead talks about it, tell them, no, you're wrong. There's just, hey, I watched this video. And let's get it out there. Let's spread the good news. This is good news. Now, I do prepping a lot of my Green Graves channel. I talk about things to be prepared for, but I always try to come up with a solution too, unlike a lot of other channels. I also try to come up with ways to deal with it. And this channel is a space technical channel, so this fits perfectly over here. That this is a solution for what we have is a big problem in our society. We don't need a problem. It's goofy. Let's get her fixed. All right, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this information, this data, and helping us get the world more informed. So you're welcome back anytime you got a good idea you'd like to share with us in these areas. So I want to thank you for coming here, making this presentation. I'm going to stop the share here because we've looked at this thing.
Oh, you're welcome, Greg. I've enjoyed it.
Let's see. Do you want to stop others? Yeah.
Oh,
go back full here. You could stop it, I think. Oh, yeah. Stop it on your end.
okay. Well, I got to find it first. Hang on. Oh, here we go. I don't know what I'm doing.
Should
Sorry.
be the bottom button on the screen. Will this stop the other sharing, or do you want? Okay, yeah, I'll just stop it. Well, it keeps putting me back to another screen though. I don't want to.
Oh, sorry. There.
There we go. There we go. That's what we're looking for. There we go. Let's see. Nice now. So appreciate all you've done. Appreciate your service in the Navy. You've lived with a nuke reactor. I was an Army guy, but I used to be stationed at Fort Greely, Alaska, and we had a nuke reactor just, you know, a 5-minute walk from my office.
Yeah.
Down. But,
my bunk was 35 feet from the reactor.
Well, you got pretty cozy with that reactor. And you retired in 2006. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know, I try to bring a lot of good experts in here. And so stay tuned. If you're not subscribed to my channel, subscribe, bang the update notification bell. And on the 20th, I'm going to have Dr. Les Johnson in here talking about the Neo Scout experiment, where they've got a solar cell where they're going to deploy to go from the Artemis-I rocket to go after an asteroid. And that's going to be an exciting topic because that's a propulsionless system because it's sailing on sunlight. That is just a very exciting topic. And he's a really great guy. I've known him for decades. So I want to thank everybody for joining and have an awesome, awesome day. Thank you. And thank you again, Dr. Bloomberg. Am I saying your name right? Is it
Blomquist.
Blomquist? I'm sorry. My apologies. Blomquist. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Y'all have a great. Bye.